Ex-prisoners of Reddit, what was the scariest thing you saw whilst on the inside? I spent a couple weeks in county jail. On this first day, when we were all being processed into the facility, strip, bend over, spread your cheeks, and cough, we were told very succinctly to never ever even joke about suicide while in the facility. Kinda like how you just don't say bomb on an airplane anymore. By day 3, I had a good understanding of the other guys I was locked up with. I was physically the biggest of the white guys in our pod, so all the white kids huddled around my table at meals to keep away from the Hispanic folks and the black folks. Yes, there are 3 teams in correctional facilities whether you like it or not. There was one kid in the group that seemed underdeveloped mentally. He probably had a learning disability among other things, but he essentially acted like a 12-year-old. I knew early on he was going to get himself in trouble because he never stopped talking or moving, and he was rubbing everyone the wrong way. I tried to tell him to chill out and be invisible, but he was not understanding what I was telling him. I had been there a week, when the 12-year-old finally lost his cool completely. He was in the shower, singing and joking around, putting on a performance that went too far, and he pooped on the floor as a joke. After the other guys in the shower grabbed their towels and ran, he proceeded to kick the poop all over the walls and into the other shower stalls. I didn't shower for the rest of my stay. Truth be told, it turned into a big scene, and then when the trustees came in to clean up the poop all over the walls, it turned into an even bigger scene. The whole time, the 12-year-old was locked in a cell near the showers, laughing and joking as other inmates had to clean up his poop and make the shower area sanitary again. State-run facilities have standards after all. The next day, everyone was looking at the 12-year-old with hate in their eyes. Kinda like Gomer Pyle in Full Metal Jacket. Everyone missed their showers the day prior due to the poop incident, and then the kid was still up to his antics at breakfast the next day. Everyone got really cold toward him, even openly mean. I'll admit, I started ignoring him completely after the poop. It took him a day or 2 to realize he was hated by all, and then his personality changed dramatically. He became sad, despondent, and started talking to the coast because the other inmates wouldn't talk to him anymore. He fucked up, and told the coast that he should just harm himself and make everyone happy, and that was all it took. They dragged out the blue burrito. This is the scariest thing I had seen in gaol. The blue burrito was a 10-foot-long blue foam mat, like you would use in gym class, with 2 12-foot-long red belts attached. They laid it out on the floor, forced the 12-year-old to lay on the mat, and then they rolled him up with his arms at his sides into the blue burrito. The 2 long red belts clipped together at the top and bottom of the burrito, keeping it all nice and tight. This was the suicide protocol at the jail. No counseling, no medical ward. You lose the ability to move. They put that poor bastard in the burrito around 8 p.m., dragged him into his cell and left him laying on the floor, wrapped up tight, until breakfast the next morning, around 8 a.m. The child molesters and gang members in protective custody get to eat breakfast first. Imagine being unable to move, barely able to breathe, with no end in sight for 12 hours on the floor of your 8x8 cell. My cell was up above his, and I heard him weeping and moaning in agony all night. He didn't say a word to anyone, or look anyone in the eye for that matter, for the rest of the time I was there. One night in the blue burrito broke him. Not me, but my husband was in prison as a young adult. He said that they had a way of checking your ego in the spot he was at. The toughest guys would come up to you on your first day and ask how many push-ups you could do. If you were smart, you would just sort of blow it off or laugh it off and move on. If you were a stupid show-off or had something to prove, you would claim a large number or talk yourself up. If you did that, then they would be all friendly and be like, "Oh, let's see it." So the poor guy would do as many push-ups as they could. The tough guys would gas the new guy up, acting friendly, pushing him to do more. They acted impressed and joked around. Then as soon as the new guy had done as many push-ups as possible, they would jump him and beat him up. He would be helpless to resist because he had maxed himself out on push-ups. Afterwards, any guy with an ego was normally really quiet for the remainder of their stay. I have a friend who used to work in corrections. They had an inmate who had a habit of assaulting and raping other inmates. This guy was serving a life sentence for murdering his grandparents, raping grandma before and after the murder, and mutilating the corpses. He had been in since the 1980s and nobody had been able to live with him because he was such a dangerous maniac. They decided to bunk him with a huge guy who was in for a ton of gang-related, violent offenses. My friend said that Department of Corrections figured that since the new cellmate was 30 years younger and covered in muscles, he would be able to handle himself. Within the first few days, the big cellmate asked for protective custody and claimed he had been raped. It seems that this old rapey murderer had made a bet with his new cellmate that whoever could do the most push-ups would get the better bunk in the cell. After our young gang member cranked out a ton of push-ups, he was so tired that he couldn't stop the beating and rape that followed. Last I heard, old rapey murderer had a room to himself. The rape was never prosecuted because the gang member was unwilling to testify because he couldn't risk people finding out. I did a couple of years when I was young and dumb. The craziest shit I saw was actually in the county jail and not the state prison. The county jail was right on the Texas-Mexico border, so there were a lot of Hispanics. What was weird was the Hispanics born in America and the Mexicans from Mexico absolutely hated each other. I saw a Hispanic from Texas heat up a bowl of water until it was boiling in the microwave. We had microwaves in the tank, and he then proceeded to throw the boiling water on a Mexican from Mexico's face and then beat the ever-loving shit out of him. That dude's screams will haunt me forever. I also saw a guy take a blade from a small pencil sharpener, tie it to a toothbrush and then slice a guy's face from ear to ear while he was sleeping. The guy lived, but it looked like a fucking murder scene. Not a prisoner, but an ex-guard. I worked at a juvenile detention facility in New Mexico. The absolute scariest thing I ever saw was a young boy, 9 years old, booked in for murdering both of his parents. There was nothing there. I fail to call this thing even human. I looked into this child's eyes and felt more fear than I ever have to this day. This was no child. It was a monster, pure evil, condensed and given human form. And to clarify, I have booked and looked after murder suspects before. It was nothing new. But this kid was different, very different. He never broke any rules and always followed commands, but never, ever spoke unless directly asked something, and then it was curt, short, just to answer a question. He never cried, either, which is highly unusual for a 9-year-old kid and gal. He was eventually tried and transferred to mental facility, but I'll never forget the kid's eyes. It haunts me to this day. I was in jail once waiting to see a judge. They'd moved me to 3 different jails in 3 days for some reason. I wasn't a troublemaker and was only in for driving on a suspended license, but I'm big and scary looking. Anyways, when they transferred me to court, I was handcuffed to someone serving life and he was Aryan Brotherhood. I'm Hispanic, but look completely white and have a shaved head. He told me blacks were green-lit and that I had to swing on sight. If I saw a black man within reach, I was required to fight him, or they would beat or kill me later. It was scary, and luckily the codes were aware and kept everyone separate until the green light ended. XCO here. Sorry if I'm not the target audience. Scariest thing I saw while working in a maximum security prison was this simple-looking middle-aged man who seemed nice at first, but was obviously very much insane. I was doing my rounds and he wanted to talk, so I talked to him for a while, not knowing what to expect. I was working in A Bay that day, which is for housing general population, and C Bay is the mentally ill population. This is important. I started talking to this guy and he introduced himself to me and I told him my name and he started telling me he was wrongly imprisoned as he did nothing wrong. I said, what do you mean? And he said he was arrested for something he didn't do and now he's here. He looked like a sad lonely white man but average in every way. He could very easily be a cashier at a tractor store or something similar. Anyway, he started talking about his sister and how he loves to fuck her and come inside her, and this is where things start to get uncomfortable for me. He then starts telling me more about his sister and how she is mean to him and is jealous of him and how she beats him sometimes and she's mad at him for not wanting to have a baby with her. I don't like talking to him, so I try to make an excuse to leave, but then the weirdest part of the conversation happens. He starts the conversation over completely from the beginning. He tells me his name and asks me mine and I'm looking at him confused but tell him my name again. Anyway, he repeats the same story about his sister word for word and yet again I try to leave but he starts the conversation over again. He does this 3 more times before I just walk away and he's still talking. Later in the day it's shave time, so I have to go around and give razor blades to the inmates who want to shave their faces. Afterwards I go around again and collect the razors and I think I'm done, but I go back to the same man and I notice he is holding a razor in his hand. I told him he needs to give me the razor now as shaving time is over and he said he can't because he's not finished yet. I told him he was done shaving his face and to please give me the razor, but he said he's done with his face but wasn't finished with the razor. He slid it through the bars and pulled back when I tried to take it from him. He was acting like a child with a toy and like I was a parent who wanted him to give me the toy. I held my hand open and demanded he give me the razor and he kept saying no, I'm not finished yet. Keep in mind I was 19 at the time and he was 54 I think. I had about enough of his bullshit, so I very firmly said give me the razor now or I will go get another officer over here. He looked upset and promised to give it back when he was done and he wouldn't be long, he just had to get the chip and the dirt out. I said what are you talking about and he said he's innocent and then I saw his arm where he was cutting into it. He said someone put a microchip in his arm and he has to get it out. He also said the chip was dirty and he had to get rid of the bad vein where the chip was. As fucked up as it was, I watched this man slice into his wrists, then put the dirty razor blade under a vein and pull it out of his arm. Imagine pulling up a guitar string about a foot into the air, but it was bloody. I stared at it. He stared at it. And then he let it fall back into his arm like it was nothing. He didn't seem to have any pain from it either and his facial expression looked pleased. I had a mini freak out but kept my cool and went to get my other officer to come get him before he did any more damage. I waited there while 2 officers came and escorted him to C Bay, where he should have been from the beginning. As he was walking away he started the conversation over again and the last thing I heard him say before he rounded the corner was, "I fucked my sister." Some things they can't prepare you for in these places. This comment got quite a lot of attention, so I'll be more descriptive for those of you with a strong stomach. If you've already had enough from the top post, stop reading now please. When I saw the guy's arm I could tell he's been going at it for a while before I came to get the razor. He didn't just slice open his wrist and pull out the vein. He's been digging into it for a while and there was arm meat and blood on this floor and bars where he was picking at it. He dropped the razor on this floor a few times and just picked it up and kept digging away into his arm. I can't stress enough how deep he cut. I saw the bones in his arm with meat around it and different areas he was cutting into. If you were to put 2 fingers to measure the thickness of your arm, then halfway down is how deep he cut. He had to push aside other muscles in his arm to get to the vein he pulled out like a guitar string. I say guitar string because that's how elastic it was. I never knew veins were that elastic before seeing that. He slipped the razor underneath the vein and slowly lifted it straight up into the air with the razor. After admiring his handiwork, he let the vein slip off the razor and it snapped back into his arm. It didn't even faze him and he seemed satisfied. I walked over to my other officer and said, "Hey, you need to come with me right now." He didn't want to come at first, but I was adamant and told him this guy is harming himself and I need help now. He saw what the guy was doing and looked at me with an, "Oh, okay, you weren't fucking around" expression, and then called for backup. I stayed with the guy while 2 more officers showed up and they escorted him away to, I assume, the medical ward and hopefully afterwards C-Bay. I went home afterwards and I tried to tell my sister what happened just to get it off my chest, and she wouldn't let me finish and got upset that I would tell her something like that. I think what upset me the most about the incident was that the guy was completely average on every way. He looked like any random southern man. He could have been a father or a brother or an old friend you went fishing with on the weekends, but he was a psychopath. Nothing about him made me feel uncomfortable until he started talking about his sister. No red flags whatsoever when I started talking to him. I even shook his hand at the beginning of our conversation and let my guard down to seem approachable. Thinking about him now, I feel sorry for him. I wonder what happened in his life to make him so crazy. Dealing with his behavior made it seem like I was talking to a child in an adult's body, and I have a strong suspicion that he was abused as a child. I remember him saying that his sister was older than him, so maybe she was a part of the abuse. And before you ask, no, I never found out what his crime was that landed him in prison, and honestly I don't want to know. We weren't supposed to ask the prisoners what crimes they committed, and after that guy I kind of stopped asking. I worked on the Supermax security unit for 1 day just to see what it was like, and there was a man in there who skinned a child while the child was still alive. I wanted to see what this guy looked like, but the captain said I wasn't allowed to know, but he did tell me the guy was a light-skinned black man. There was only one light-skinned guy there and he was a total asshole. He would kick his door all night and scream and make it hard for anyone to focus in the unit. He almost peed on the floor thinking that would piss us off, but the door was sealed on the bottom so it stayed in his room and his plan backfired on him. I also met Brian Nichols. That was fun. And no, I don't work there anymore. That wasn't a good time in my life and I'm happy I moved on from that. Would I ever go back to working in a prison? Yes, for a while, but I'm definitely not making a career out of it. Prison work pays quite well comparatively and it feels good to have stable income, but the risk is very high for any number of things to go wrong. I had to stay 6 hours past my shift one day because a ladle went missing and we had to put the prison on lockdown to find it so an inmate couldn't use it as a shank. This isn't my story, but my uncle, we'll call him M. Now M went to jail for possession of heroin. He was addicted to it at the time he went to jail. He was in prison for almost 2 years. Now M had friends who were in jail before, so he knew to stay out of the way and out of sight. One day a new inmate was brought in. He was put in the cell right next to my uncle's. Immediately when this guy was brought in, hostilities went up fast. Everyone glared at this guy. M noticed everyone was glaring or threatening this guy. My uncle M asked around as to why everyone hated this guy, confused as hell. Turns out the guy was a child molester who was serving a life sentence because he raped her and then murdered a young kid. One night M wakes up to the sound of beating. He can hear all of this from his cell. One of the prison guards had let himself and they beat the pedophile up. As my uncle was in there, he saw and heard this guy be beaten, tortured and even raped. He didn't say anything because he believed the guy deserved it. My uncle cares a lot about kids. My uncle left and he heard on the news years later, the pedophile hung himself while in gaol. Years of torture got to him, as my uncle says. Not so much scary but wild. I used to work in a maximum security prison hospital in the ICU. Inmates are handcuffed to their beds and the door is locked and medical staff is escorted in and out of the patient, inmates' rooms and all the other units outside of ICU. They're sick and we need to be able to get to them immediately if shit hit the fan. coded. Well, one night the entire prison hospital was overflowed with patients, and so we had non-ICU patients in the ICU because they needed the room and tax money reimbursement, of course. Well, this one guy with a bit of an attitude in particular wasn't all that sick, but he was in the ICU. And him and his female nurse were kind of yelling at each other, arguing while she was in his room. All of a sudden he got real quiet, stood up from his bed, walked over to her, put his arms out to the side, palms open, and open hand clap her face. It was loud. You could rupture somebody's eardrums doing shit like that. Well, before we knew it, the guards emptied their cans of pepper spray in the room. They're taught to empty the canister because it's the same amount paperwork as it is for a single spray, so they fumigated the guy. It took a minute for it to settle. Everyone, even the guards and other nurses, were coughing. Kind of short-sighted on the guards' part, pretty dangerous. You got patients on ventilator and shit. Just not a good look. Eventually the guards swarmed the guy yanking from his room, and we did not see him again like ever. Not me, but my husband. He was put in a maximum security county jail for 6 months for a traffic violation. The judge hated him for missing some child support payments on a child in his custody because of the mother. Turned out, after he got out and the mother insisted then to get a paternity test, that the child whom she had been telling my husband all along wasn't his after all. Anyway, while he was in there, he would play spades with the other prisoners, one of which was a convicted murderer. My husband is 5 feet 7 inches and at the time about 200 pounds, not muscle. My husband was winning and the murderer said something along the lines of, "I should punch you in the face." My husband glibly replied something like, "If it makes you feel better." The 6 feet 2 inches 210 pounds, muscled murderer stood up and punched my husband in the side of the head. My husband's head turned with the punch, but he remained seated, waited a moment, then turned his head back forward, looked at the guy and said, "We still playing?" The murderer sat back down and my husband shuffled the cards. They then continued to play for the rest of the afternoon. The murderer never played with my husband again, and the day my husband was being released, the murderer approached him and said something like, "I'm glad you're leaving because I've been worried since I punched you that you were going to kill me one night in my sleep." My husband laughed and replied, "I promised my fiancée, that would be me, the one typing this at the time, that I wouldn't get any more time added to my sentence. Besides, I deserved it after I basically told you to do it anyway." I am going through processing on a Sunday night in county. I'm in a waiting area and I am not lying, but Las Vegas County have the hottest girls on the weekend. I talking about an endless line of beautiful women coming through. All of a sudden this Mexican guy sits next to me. We start talking and then he asks me for my paperwork. I give him my paperwork and laughs at it. I chuckle as well. He then proceeds to show me his paperwork and it says I'm Strawberry. He tells me the story on how he was ordered to collect taxes on a local drug dealer here in Vegas. Then boom, sheriffs are running down the hall. They pull this middle-aged Caucasian woman out of the cell. She's yelling, "I'm gonna kill myself, I'm gonna kill myself." They subdue her and tie her down in a loony chair with a hat that looks like she's a beekeeper. The sheriff places her in front of the waiting area. I believe they did this to show everyone that this is what's gonna happen to you if you fool around. So we are just sitting there with an old lady that looks like Anthony Hopkins from the movie Silence of the Lambs. I'm not gonna lie, but I was rolling on this inside. Now it's time to head to the tank. The sheriffs ask you if you got any gang affiliations before they start sending you in. You have to tell them before they put you in because obviously you're gonna get into a fight. So I am walking down the hall and I see the first tank with one guy in it by himself. I then proceed to the second tank and there's about 20 of us in there. It's in the morning and there's just people just laying on the benches and ground sleeping with the roll of toilet paper as a pillow. I find a spot and I lay down, trying to rest. I hear the TV and it's blaring loud as hell. I will kid you not, but the show Cops was on. I think it was a marathon because the whole day the only show I saw on TV was Cops. Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? All day just blaring. So everyone wakes up because breakfast comes. Everyone gets a plate and on this plate is a sandwich. I swear every single sandwich had the ends of the loaf as the slice. Just the end of the loaf as the slice. So comical. Then everyone just starts talking to each other. So one guy just asks me if I heard what happened to the tank next door. I reply, no. He tells me that they were all in a tank and all of a sudden a guy gets up in the middle of the tank and pulls down his pants to take a shit. He grabs his feces and starts to wipe it all over the walls. They evacuate the tank and move everyone next door. The guy got a whole tank by himself for the whole night.